right. Is my audio good, Paul? Audio good? Yeah. All right, excellent. All right, so we have Mr. Brandon Cornett here today with us from Elevator 3. I want to welcome everyone to our third and final talk of the semester in our Distinguished Lecturer Series, part of our Industry Connect initiative. And so just I'm going to give you a little bit of background information on Brandon. He is the CEO and the co-founder of Elevator 3, which is a software consulting agency in Baton Rouge. Elevator 3 provides custom web and mobile development apps, business intelligence, and system integration services for clients ranging from startups to government entities. Brandon is also the CTO at Paystar, which is a software product that strives to simplify bill payment processes for utility companies. And for both businesses, Brandon desires to build teams that love to do what they do and that have the tools that they need to deliver scalable and robust products for their clients. Brandon graduated with a bachelor's in computer science from Southeastern, so he's one of our alums, back in 2012, and he sits on the department's industry advisory board. He helps provide feedback and advice on improving the curriculum and better preparing our students for professional settings. And he served as clients in some of our Industry Connect classes, as you know, 411 specifically this semester. He received his MBA from LSU, and he also enjoys presenting technical and professional topics at things like the SQL Saturday and other local user groups. So today he's joining us. It's a privilege to have him come in and speak to us on mobile development for business. And he's just going to tell us about some of the lessons he's learned. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Mr. Cornett. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Bonnie. I'm very happy to be here today. And I'll go ahead and share my screen so we can get started. Just want to make sure you guys can hear me all right, correct? Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Okay,
you.
great. And you should be seeing the screen now. Just let me know when you can see that.
Looks good.
Great. All right, so I'll go ahead and get started. I kind of wanted to just give a little bit of background, which Bonnie already did really for me. So yeah, just wanted to mention I've been in most of the computer science students' shoes that are watching right now. So I know how everything goes trying to make it through school and get out into the real world. So the main point of this topic was really to try to provide some context into, things I've just learned over 11 years of being in the workforce, and try to give you some tips and things to watch out for, essentially. She mentioned Elevator 3 and Paystar, so I don't need to really go over that. One of the bigger things I wanted to say is just I've been in the development role, both an intern, junior developer, senior developer, but I've also been on the other side on the PM front. So in one of my positions at Turner Industries, I started kind of doing more of the project management, and I think there's a great being a developer and then moving to a PM position kind of gives you a great great insight into kind of what the developers are thinking, right? So, and the ability to have just the ability to connect the two pieces is what I'm really interested in. How do you connect the developers to the business side of things and kind of communicate those requirements back and forth? So I like doing that, but I've kind of been around the block in terms of all the different roles available. So just wanted to mention that. And then also everything from, I kind of started in the consulting world. So I actually was at Invoke for about 6 years. So I know you guys are in the Invoke Innovation Lab right now. So great experience there. Moved over to more of an enterprise setting at Turner Industries. So kind of went from a smaller company, right, that's working with clients directly, and you're kind of the person that's really driving the revenue for the company, right, to something more of an enterprise like Turner that you're not the person driving the revenue. You're actually more of you're seen as more of an overhead, right? Because you're not the main primary function of the business. So that was an interesting switch to get into the enterprise realm. And then now I'm back in the startup realm with Paystar and Elevator 3. So kind of made it full circle, but kind of in that realm, I just wanted to let you guys know that it's great to kind of get the different perspectives. So being able to see how you do consulting and how enterprises work and bureaucracy and who you're kind of reporting to on each of those different fronts. So definitely interesting there. So also got my MBA from LSU. That was the only other thing. So I guess the other thing I wanted to say is that I kind of started putting thoughts together for this talk and ended up with a diagram that looks like this that you can barely see. So 11 years is a long time and you learn a lot. So I was trying to figure out what to say in this talk. So if some of it comes across not as coherent as I'd like, you can kind of see why. So I'll try to keep it to about 30, 45 minutes. So the main point of this talk was letting you know that businesses are going mobile, right? I'm working with more and more clients that I'm seeing are doing mobile and kind of just wanted to dig into why that may be. Why are they going mobile? And then I kind of asked myself this next question: why does a business do anything? And the answer to that is they're trying to increase profits, right? For the large majority of cases, that's the main point of the business is to increase profits. So how do you go about doing that? We can either, well, really we need to maintain our current revenue, right? We then need to add more revenue to increase our profits, but you can also do this by decreasing costs as well. So different ways to go about that. But we're going to kind of dig into how mobile apps can help accomplish these tasks. So one of the ways that we can help increase profits is to improve the decision-making ability of the company. We can do this by, let's see. So if we allow our managers and executives to make decisions faster, we can start making decisions that allow us to make the ones that will make us most profitable, right? And the way mobile fits into that is we can start collecting data from anywhere, right? If I have Turner, for example, right? If I have 20,000 people out in the field working in all these plants across the U.S. or across the Gulf South, allowing them to have these iPads or phones in their hands lets them collect data kind of on the fly from anywhere they're at. Now that we can collect the data, we can immediately provide that information back to the home office, which we can then turn into dashboards and stuff like that, which can be presented to executives, and they can just see that information on their computer, sitting in their office. So it kind of gives a lot more visibility. It also gives you more accurate data, right? Because now we're not taking paper, writing down information on it, kind of sending it off in the mail or something like that. If we have these mobile devices that are internet connected, we can now quickly enter that data. It's more accurate, it gets submitted on the fly, and we provide more visibility to those people who need to make those decisions. From a company that's providing, mobile apps or technology to, I guess one way to go about this is to also make yourself more sticky, right? So if you already have existing clients that you're scared you may lose, or you want to just embed yourself more so that you don't lose that client, this kind of goes to the maintaining revenue, right? The way you can do that is figuring out, okay, we have our current processes, we have what we currently implemented with the client, but how can we find ways to add more value to that client as well? And you can do that by cross-selling, different mobile apps and different technologies that provide more insight into the business and how to make it more efficient. Let's see. You can also improve your sales pipeline, right? So it's about new sales as well. How do we get new revenue? And that's also from creating apps or giving information to your sales representatives that let them make decisions quicker, get notified that they need to reach back out to these different sales prospects. So really creating tools that will help your sales team contact these clients as necessary, figure out who they need to be contacting, when they need to do it. And then you can also automate that process, right? You can also not only see I need to contact these people, but quickly have templates or something that can be in the palm of people's hands at any given moment where they can just say, hey, let's send an email out or a text message or something and start a conversation. So having these little flexible devices in the palms of any of these employees' hands kind of makes this whole process more efficient. kind of on that note, it's interesting too, because I've seen at some of the larger companies I've worked at, they also use mobile technology as more of a marketing tool too, right? So it's not only how can we actually improve these processes and actually do it, but also if we're saying we have all this innovation and all these different things that are providing these awesome benefits, that's great marketing material too. So that can actually be the difference if you're bidding on a contract, for instance. That technology may actually push you over the edge, right? And I've seen that more than once. So it can also be a good marketing tool. So I kind of wanted to step into some of the examples I've seen that have, I've either created or I've seen just implemented in businesses. So some of those that are trying to increase the profit, right, are automation. So how do we automate manual processes that are happening at the moment? Whether that be on paper, whether that be, maybe it's calculations that are happening by hand right now. How can we put a process in place where now people can just simply input, quick numbers or inputs, and then have that process actually happen behind the scenes without manual intervention. So if you can do that, that kind of goes to the cost cutting aspect of it, right? So if we're reducing our costs, now we're being more efficient. We can use our people in other ways. That then drives up the profit in the long run. Asset tracking is another one. So this is all about inventory or, different items out in the field potentially. You'll notice a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about or a lot of my examples are more industrial. That comes from the Turner perspective, right? So kind of in that whole realm, a big thing was we have a lot of parts, we have a lot of equipment that we're moving around to different places, and sometimes that equipment just gets lost, or sometimes we put it somewhere and we don't remember where we put it. So there's lots of mobile app capabilities in that realm to kind of remember locations that you put things, or maybe it's the last one I have on the list is process tracking, right? So we can actually scan barcodes, kind of put QR codes in different things or barcodes where we can scan things. You can use that mobile device's location that's built in to kind of keep track of different pieces of equipment. We talked about sales a little bit, right? The ability to give these tools to our sales team that give them quick access to information kind of goes along with the CRM too, customer relationship management. Being able to take notes on our customers, what they like, what they don't like, and kind of giving that information very quickly to our sales team on mobile devices where they can quickly just look it up. Those are great tools that help speed up the sales pipeline as well. Handbooks and reference materials are another one. Being able to just type in, what I'm looking for and be able to see a whole process listed out on a device. That's another really good cost-cutting application that we can develop. Customer collaboration is another one. Just again, this being more geared towards plants in my experience, but being able to quickly do things on tablets in the field as they're happening, and then giving that information to our customers as well, or their customers, so they can kind of know what's going on in real time, right? So now they can sit in the control room and monitor everything across their plant or what we're doing. So all of these things contribute to kind of increasing our profits, and kind of mixing that with how cheap devices are getting. And it kind of depends on what you're looking for, but if you kind of mix that in, mobile apps can be a great tool to just provide value to a business and kind of, increase our profits overall. So there's also some scenarios where mobile may not make sense to certain businesses. You'd be surprised, I said costs are lower, but if you're trying to deploy, 1,000 or 2,000 or however many tablets across a whole organization, those costs do add up. So one of the big things you have to consider when you're thinking about mobile is the hardware cost and kind of how that plays into it, who's going to pay for it. If you're doing this for one of your clients or one of the customer's clients, maybe there's a potential to kind of share that cost between the two. But that's definitely something to consider. And then also just the development costs. That one's kind of interesting coming from a consulting background. Sometimes you get clients that come in and you give them a quote for how much an app's going to cost, and their eyes just get super wide, right? They're like, I had no idea this was going to cost this much. And then other times you actually have people that come in thinking it's gonna be a lot more. So it's a very interesting dynamic in consulting that you have to just consider. Let's see. Another thing that you need to think about when you're thinking about making a mobile app is, does it even need to be a mobile app, right? Mobile inherently just comes with a bunch of different considerations you have to think about. One of the questions you need to make sure you ask yourself, am I doing this because it's cool, or am I trying to push it because it's cool, or because I want to do it? Or could it just be a simple, responsive mobile website that you can kind of develop on the fly, push out? It's not distributed at all. You don't have to worry about any of the infrastructure, or not as much of the infrastructure. So does it actually need to be a mobile app, or is a website that's just responsive something that the client would be okay with? Also asking yourself why someone would download it. I think this one is kind of different in different scenarios. If you're a business and you have employees that are, that will have these devices, obviously you can push this app to them and say, hey, you're using this app as part of the process, right? But if you're doing it something, if you're making something that you're just trying to push to the App Store, you do have to consider, you just need to think about, why would someone do this? What's their incentive to go and download it? And it's definitely interesting in, again, the consulting realm. When clients come in, this is one of the questions we ask them is, have you thought about why you want it to be a mobile app? Because it could, again, just be a website. Who's going to actually log into the App Store and say, okay, I want to search for, a t-shirt app or a t-shirt making app? Why wouldn't they just go to the website or Google it or something like that? So just considering that. If you have competition, you have to provide something unique. That's just part of business as well, right? If you don't have something that sets you apart, you're not really going to make it without having that differentiation if somebody else is more popular. And then also, again, just kind of considering off-the-shelf products. Coming from the consulting world, again, if a client comes in and says, hey, I want this, I feel that it's partly my responsibility to say, hey, I know what you're asking for. I see that, but I also know this off-the-shelf product that could solve your needs right away without us having to develop this for you. So why don't you just pay for that and use it? Some scenarios that work, some that doesn't, but it's always good to offer or think about what's off the shelf already that we can kind of put together or integrate with to reduce those costs. And it's interesting because just off the top, you'd think from a consulting perspective, yeah, we want to make money. We want to build apps for people, right? But I've found over the years that if you just give the client that's coming to you this off-the-shelf project and you're honest with them, they actually, you start to build trust there, and they start to trust you more. So anytime they have any needs, you're kind of the first person that comes to mind because they'll trust that you're going to do what's in the best interest for them. So you may not get that project right now, kind of starting off, but maybe you'll get, I've built many relationships that are still ongoing from way back in the past. And they just keep coming back, and any question they have, I'm kind of the go-to person, right? So you're building that relationship for the long term, which gives you not only that, that revenue right in the moment, but also in the future as well. So, but if you have decided to build an app, this is kind of where I'm going to get more into sort of the tips and development pieces of the presentation. So we've decided that we're going to make a mobile app now. So what kind of considerations do we need? What should I watch out for? That kind of thing. So what are you building for? This is one of the bigger things if you decided you're building a mobile app that you need to take into consideration. So is it iOS and Android? Is it phones and tablets or tablets? Is it landscape and portrait? These all may seem like simple questions, but these are really, the bigger questions you have to get answered when you start to decide to build a mobile app. And I think what we found is most of the time you can kind of start off with one platform or the other with clients and, start somewhere, get something out there, and then kind of add the other platforms at a later date. And there are multiple ways to go about that, which I'll go into in just a second. But there's lots of questions you need to start asking, because if you're trying to support multiple platforms, multiple device sizes, also orientations, now you have to resize things, right? So it's a lot to consider, and that's one of the bigger questions you need to ask. I kind of like to call that device hell as well. And that kind of goes into, you have all these questions we're asking, but if you're pushing something out there to the store, you don't really know what someone's going to have, right? If it's the App Store, obviously they have an iOS device, right? If it's the Google Play Store, there's just tons and tons of options out there. So you just really have to consider when you're building a mobile app, you have people with any type screen size, different capabilities, different versions. Some people may still have an iPhone 4, right, that you have to support. So, and you can set all that, and those are decisions you have to make, but it's just, you have to put a lot of thought into what you're going to support kind of up front, and that will kind of determine what you're going to do down the road. And then I kind of just have on here text selection too. So again, are you doing something more web-based? You can use React Native. I know that is native, but you can write it in JavaScript. Are you doing cross-platform technologies where it's not, Swift or Java or whatever it may be? We're doing something more cross-platform that somebody's built on top of those, right? All of those are different tools that you have in your tool belt. They just have different considerations for both. If you write something natively that's not cross-platform, such as, again, Swift or something like that, now to do an Android version of the application, we have to almost, it's almost a complete rewrite. We might know all the logic and how it's going to work, but now we have to rewrite it on a different platform versus something like Xamarin, or even before that, a long time ago, we had Accelerator from Titanium. That was what I started on. But those are all cross-platform tools that let you build for all those different devices at the same time. So lots of pros and cons to both. I think Xamarin Forms is something that was just starting to catch on kind of towards the end of when I was developing. I know there was a lot of limitations up front, so you kind of just have to play it by ear and figure out what your requirements are, what you're going to support, and then you can kind of go and select the tech from there. All right, another thing I wanted to mention, just because there are so many different devices, there's services out there which are pretty cool to use. They are actually libraries of real devices that you can kind of pick and choose what you want to test on, but you can push your app up to this service. This one here is App Center. It's called App Center Test, I believe. I think this used to be Xamarin Cloud when I used to use it. But essentially you push your app up and it will step through every one of your screens or whatever you've set up for tests. And it will actually tell you, hey, these all work on these different devices. Here's the screenshots I have for each step of your test. But, on this specific one right here, this one crashed or, had an exception. So it'll tell you that, show you the error message that popped up and a screenshot of exactly when it happened as well. So there's a lot of tools out there that will help you develop for multiple platforms all at once, and sizes and all that kind of stuff. So another thing you need to consider is how you're going to approach the project. So now we've determined what we're building for, what platforms we're going to use, but you also kind of have to talk about the approach to the project, I guess. Right up front, you need to determine what your minimum viable product is. And I'm not sure how much this gets talked about, but choosing, I guess one approach is, hey, let's plan for multiple months, figure out exactly what we're going to do, right? This is more of a waterfall approach, but figure out exactly what we're going to do and then try to go build it all at once. And it's going to take months and months and months. We finally release it to the public or to our users and it just doesn't work. It's not what they expect. And that's kind of the problem with waterfall in general. So taking more of an agile approach and saying, okay, what can we do that's the minimum amount of work that will be able, will still provide value to our end user, but let's go ahead and get it out there, have them start testing it, and then provide feedback to us that lets us kind of pivot on the fly and go down different routes as we need to and keep adding on to this, this base product. I find that works really well. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of a company called Block Lawn Care in Baton Rouge, but they're I guess, on-demand lawn service. It's a mobile app you can download where you type in your address, gives you a quote for your house for lawn mowing, and then you kind of say go, and somebody will accept and come out and cut your grass. It's generally the whole process. But what we did with them, they had this giant plan. They wanted all these features, and we said, you know what? Let's start out with something small, and maybe what we started out with, you have to do some manual intervention with throughout the process. And what we'd like to do is when we have, thousands and thousands of users, we'd like this process to be all more automatic. But to get it out there, to test the waters, so you don't have to go spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, let's start with something that's a lot smaller and a lot cheaper, so you can get it out there. It looks really great, but you can prove your idea and then start building on top of it. I've just found over time that that's a great way to go about it. And it kind of lets you build that relationship with that customer you're building your app for too. And you kind of work together to build what's best. Another point is starting with the 90% case. So there's a lot of different things that can happen, a lot of different ways and weird things that can throw wrenches into your projects. So for just starting out, just making sure your account, if you can account for 90% of what's going to happen, or 95 even, and there's all these little edge cases at the end, don't worry about those edge cases up front. Try to get that MVP out there. Try to get that base project out there that covers that, the majority of the cases. And I've even found that what you can do is kind of log or watch with analytics what's going on in your app. And if somebody's trying to go outside of that 90% case you've built for, just have alerts that kind of go to you that say, hey, somebody's doing something different than what we expected, which may cause an issue. But starting off, that's okay. And we know that. We've developed this app, but we're working on it. But for that 10%, you can kind of just work one-on-one with those people that need those specific things. So take it one step at a time. Start with something, then build on it, and keep adding features over time, and you'll have something great. Another thing I found is having deadlines for yourself. Even if it's, if you have a client, you definitely have deadlines. But if you don't, you're building something internally, try to set deadlines for yourself too, of milestones you want to get to. I find that kind of gives you something to shoot for. You start realizing if you're being too ambitious. So you kind of set your own, when are we going to have this thing fully done? So just try to do that when you can. Just as a general rule too, if you haven't experienced this yet, 80% of a project is really easy to do. You can kind of knock it out. And if it's a 6-month project, we can knock out 80% in probably like 3 months in general. And we know that. It's that last 3 months is just completing that last bit of 20% of work, because there's so much kind of complexities and different, oh, we forgot to add this, or we didn't handle that, those other 10% of edge cases. So in general, getting the bulk of your app done is fairly easy to do and straightforward, but really you have that 20% that takes a lot longer. So just kind of prepare for that as well. Your clients are always going to have, things that you missed, or reports they want, or whatever that you have to kind of flesh out that weren't in the original scope. And in short, ship it. This is something I see Justin Abdi on this call too. He's a partner at Elevator 3, but that's kind of our, what we like to say a lot is, we can sit here and think about it, we can talk about it, but let's try to ship something. Fail fast if we need to, right? Failing's not, it's not a bad thing, as long as it's not bad, right? But failing in general is not bad. Let's learn from it. Let's get better, ship it out there, and start getting feedback from the customer that lets us, move forward and provide exactly what they're looking for. So moving on to a little bit more of the development side of things, I'm just going to list out a couple of hard things that keep coming up over time. Time zones are the first thing that I feel like I need to mention, because they come up all the time. I feel like every week we talk about these. Time is hard. Time zones are hard. There's daylight savings time you have to worry about. There's states like, I believe it's Arizona, that don't observe daylight savings time. There's also just different types of times in general. So, if I have an event at 4 p.m., I could keep going on this forever, but if I have an event at 4 p.m., I kind of just want it to be at 4 p.m. and I'm saying that no matter what, versus trying to convert it to different time zones in certain scenarios. So just letting you know, not going to go into it anymore, but time zones are one of the hardest things that I've come across. There's different scenarios where you want kind of point in time times, you want to convert them to certain people's time zones. If you fly to, across the US, sometimes you want to see things in central time. If I go to California, sometimes I want to see things in central time, even when I'm in California. Sometimes I want them to convert to my time zone wherever I'm at. It just kind of depends. So just be aware of that. There are tools out there like Notatime for C# and Moment.js, and Moment has a time zone library as well. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're doing things as well. I guess one note on that I'd say is, if you know that you're only in Central Time or if you're only in Eastern Time, something to consider in just shipping it. Don't store everything in UTC and try to worry about time zones. Maybe if it's just for this one client and they're always going to be in Central Time, let's just store things in Central Time, right? Keep it simple. So just a consideration. Security is also hard, and this kind of depends on lots and lots of factors. But in general, I think we found there's something for C# specifically. There's something called Identity Server that we've kind of adopted. It's an open source platform. I think they're actually going paid, but people have put a lot of thought into security. They've gone through different trials and everything. You trying to create your own security framework is probably not going to work out, or wouldn't work out if somebody attacked it. Even using the built-in Microsoft authentication stuff, if you're doing C#, that's great. But try not to develop your own security mechanisms if you can. One of the harder things on mobile is that, on web, you're using cookies, you're using, if you're just doing logins on the web side of things, you're using cookies, you can use local storage and stuff like that. You don't really know what people are going to have, or you have to support all kinds of different things on mobile as well. There's refresh tokens and OAuth and all kinds of stuff. So I guess the bigger thing to say there, security is hard as well. Try not to recreate the wheel is the big takeaway there. Try to use something that somebody's put a lot of thought into already. Another thing when you're doing mobile development is emulators versus real devices. I can't tell you how many times I've developed a whole mobile app, thought it was great, and I was like, cool, let me plug it into the device to ship it to the customer, or kind of put it on the device to test. I put it on the device and it just doesn't work. If you can, throughout the process of developing your application, try to test on the actual devices you're going to be using, because emulators won't match up all the time. You also, if you're supporting cameras or location or whatever that may be, there just might be, slight differences between the different platforms. So keep that in mind. I have to say that designs are hard too. There's different types of programmers. There's, people that are really good at user experience, but kind of what I've done is I've decided to stay in my lane. I've decided I'm a great developer. I cannot design anything. So I kind of have contractors that I can reach out to provide designs. And then we kind of just implement those designs, or, hire one on staff if you can. Obviously, it's not something everyone can do, depending on the situation, but just designing things is hard in general. I find that mock-ups and wireframes are usually good to do. They're low fidelity. They're very just straightforward and easy to look at. But if you can kind of do those wireframes or mock-ups of what you're thinking, it kind of lets you and the stakeholder, you and an actual designer doing the designs, you can kind of talk about those and relay those messages back and forth to one another. I guess this is a bigger one that I really try to harp on is app updates. So when you're distributing a mobile application, you're distributing it to the App Store, you're distributing it to the Play Store, right? People are downloading that. They could go turn their phone off and leave their phone in their drawer for, years, and then come back and try to open up the app without updating it to the latest version. And then you start to have problems potentially. So a big thing when you have a distributed application like you do with mobile apps is you need to be backwards compatible with different with all your different versions. You either need to decide to be backwards compatible, or you need to have some way to communicate to your users, hey, this version of the app isn't going to work anymore. You need to go download the new one. And I've kind of run into that a couple of times over the years where I didn't build announcements, like the ability to communicate with my users into the application, and it's kind of bitten me. And one of the things is losing Android key stores. I think that a lot of the technologies help with this, and Google may have fixed it by now or made it easier to keep track of, but there's actually something called a key store, like a certificate that you have to use when you're publishing Google Play applications. If you lose that key store, or you don't keep it around or backed up or anything, you can't publish updates to your application anymore. And I actually ran into it one time where I had a version up there, didn't have announcements or any way to communicate to users, lost the key store, had to push a new one, and I couldn't tell the people, hey, go download the other one from the App Store. Or maybe I found a way, but it was really hacky and it made an entity in the application or something. So kind of worked around it. But all that to say, I think announcements are really important to focus on. Make sure you have a way to communicate with your users, whether it's push notifications or something in the app, but also checking to see if you have maintenance going on, if your actual API or web-based version or whatever it's communicating with goes down. Make sure you have a way to communicate that maintenance is going on. And also, again, checking for version updates. If there's an update that's mandatory, checking that, doing that the first thing when someone loads the app could be really good to show them a warning and say, hey, you can't do this anymore. You need to go download the other one. Click here to open it or something. So just something to keep in mind. The next two kind of go together, data syncing and offline access. That's always a really good question to ask when your customer wants an application. Is this going to be used, again, kind of thinking through Turner's use case. They were in plants, throughout the Gulf South. And again, some of these plants don't have very good cell reception. So the ability to be able to work offline, how do you store that data locally, keep track of all the changes you're making, or maybe you can't keep track of them or change them, but you can just view data. You have to make all these decisions. And then how do we sync back up and have those two data sources kind of get combined in the end is kind of a hard thing to keep track of. So definitely think about data syncing, offline access. There's a lot of great packages and tools out there, again, that other people have already thought about that can keep these in sync for you. Scaling is another hard thing. So in general, if you're doing enterprise applications for smaller businesses, it may not be a problem, right? You have this one API, you have this one app, it may do a bunch of work, things may be inefficient, but you know what, there's 4 users, so it doesn't really matter. If you're building something that's gonna go out to 20,000 iPads or the general public, you need to be ready to scale. You need to be, your app needs to have or your API, I guess, is one thing. You need to be able to have that API scalable to where you can handle the demand that comes in as well. So just thinking about that if you can. Azure, AWS, those online services make it very easy sort of to scale your applications as needed. There's lots of other things you have to think about data duplication and cross-server consistency and stuff like that. But just something to think about. And the last thing I think is really hard is naming your project. I feel like you can spend forever on it. What I've found is just name your project something. If you're making an online course system, name it courses. If you're whatever it is, just name it what it is. And then coming back and renaming things is not hard. So just again, focus on MVP. How can I get something out there that I can get feedback on, right? And then worry about the smaller things. So I'm gonna go through a few tips when you're developing. I'm sure this is pretty obvious, but commit often. Can't tell you how many times I have or I've known someone that has reverted things inadvertently and lost everything, or didn't back things up. So, or honestly, it comes to merging too. If you have all these different teams and people working on things, right? If you're not committing often and you don't have all these commits, you can kind of work through and make sure you can see what happened, so you know how to merge things. You just end up with these giant, 1,000 file merges that you're trying to merge everything together. So just make sure you're committing often and you're merging into, your common branch. I don't know if that's master or you guys have some other, maybe you have feature branches or whatever, but make sure you're trying to pull these different pieces together often, because if you don't, you're going to end up at the end saying, okay, it may not even be worth it to try to merge this because we're so, we have so many conflicts. Maybe we have to just try to rewrite it with, the other person's changes. So make sure you commit. Kind of go along with that, just please keep this in the back of your mind that you should always be taking backups. If you're moving things between servers or you're messing with the database at all that may cause an issue, really at all, if you're manually managing something, try to take backups. Again, that's just something that you see time and time again where someone didn't do it and you have to go try to figure out, different alternative ways to get data back. It generally doesn't take a lot to perform a backup or copy the folder that you're about to mess with. So please just try to do that. These two kind of go together too. Didn't always do pull requests. Whenever you kind of, go develop some code and you want to merge your code into the master branch and kind of push it in. On smaller teams, Sometimes that person is just kind of pushing their stuff up and, just going along and writing code and pushing it as they need to. When you have more than one person, you have multiple people working on a team, it's really good to create pull requests, which essentially say, here's all the stuff that I changed. Here's the diff of everything I've done. Giving that to another person on your team to kind of look at and look over is always a great idea, because there's something you might have just missed. To go along with that, we started doing code demos. So when you do a pull request, also pulling a developer in, just say, hey, come over to my computer, let me run this for you, show you what I did. I find that often a lot of times, you're going over it, you're saying, hey, I did this, but you actually catch something in the requirements that you missed yourself just by demoing to somebody. So even if they don't really get what you're doing, you going through it kind of gives you some perspective too. It may uncover some things that you missed. So another thing, big O notation, time complexities, things that I learned in school that I didn't really pay too much attention to and kind of just gathered and took tests on and stuff like that, right? You don't really realize how important that is until you start trying to do what I was mentioning earlier with scaling. I can't really, this is just something you have to figure out, as you're writing queries, as you're working with databases, you just have to realize, over time, what's fast, what's not. We're moving data, over the network to pull loads of data down. So it's just really important to kind of learn what's efficient, what's not. If you're working with SQL Server, there's something called the SQL Server Profiler. That's not on I have a tools list coming up. I need to go add that. But SQL Server Profiler, if you're doing stuff and you just have SQL Server Profiler up, you can kind of see the queries going across the chain. And if you're using something like Entity Framework, sometimes those aren't efficient. So I think this is actually what William talked about last time a little bit. But just really seeing or realizing what's going to cause, I'm actually hitting the database. I'm working over 100 records or 1,000 records, knowing that each one of those records or entities is going to hit, be a database query. That's something you don't see when your app is very small and it's just, 5 people using it. But if you scale that out, or you get large data sets that you weren't developing for when you were developing the code, I've seen that happen too, where you just, you have this little small data set. You're like, let me just see what the data looks like and kind of code against that. Then we get to production, there's just like, it's not 5 records you're trying to import, it's 10,000 records, right? Time complexities get very important, where you need to, make sure things are optimized. And there's different tools out there to help you with that as well. So just keep that in mind. Another thing is thinking about your end user. So while you're developing this, you're kind of doing what you think makes sense, but I often find that that's not really what your end user is going to be doing, right? So it's really important to kind of think or ask about who's going to be using this app, how they're going to be doing it. Think about, if they're going to be wearing gloves. That's a big thing I kind of ran across, right? We're talking about this industrial application or mobile app that we're trying to put out there for people, but they have these giant gloves on that, they're fat fingering everything. So you have to think about the size of, the buttons, and maybe we need a bigger tablet instead of an iPad mini or something like that. So really thinking about how your end user is going to use this application, what's going to make their lives easier. It's not all about just writing the code that you're being told to write. Try to keep in mind who this is going to be for. Again, I feel like I've iterated this a couple of times, but don't reinvent the wheel. Someone's probably done what you're trying to do already, whether that's authentication, whether that's time zone, issues. Lots of things out there. There's things that people have done already that have thought about it probably a lot more than you have when you're just sitting here trying to, write it out. So see if there's packages out there that already do this. CSVs is a good one. I deal with CSVs every day in almost every project, imports, exports, that kind of thing. There's a tool called CSV Helper out there that just does everything beautifully already. So that's a great example of one, I believe. The next thing, I've kind of seen this a couple of times too. When you're developing a project, you import a package, and then sometimes the project dies, or sometimes, it kind of depends on if you're writing an application that's going to get shipped and be done with it, or you're trying to write an application or a product like Paystar that we have that's ongoing and continuously being developed, right? And it's not going to stop, essentially. Keeping those packages updated is crucial, because they do have security fixes or bug fixes in those things, right? I say in theory here though, because while you want to keep those packages updated, if you're going to do that, you also need to make sure everything still works, right? And even though, I guess just something I want to make sure you guys know is, even though it compiles, it may not mean that it's actually going to work in when it's running in runtime, right? There could be something that's changed that changes the way something behaves. So if you are updating your packages, make sure you're reading the release notes, looking at the minor builds. If it's a major build that's been released, maybe wait or put a lot more effort into testing to make sure that's something you want to do. Learning keyboard shortcuts is important. It's so interesting seeing different, different personality types. Some people are just on the keyboard moving around really fast, and you have some that are, moving around the mouse and just clicking on everything. So just keyboard shortcuts are really, really useful. Learn all of them that you can. Practice often. So whether that's you going home after work and building something you want to build, learning new technologies. I guess another bullet point, this could have been, continue, always be learning, reading books, just learning about different things. You can never learn everything in this field. There's so much out there. So just practicing what you're doing, writing smaller applications kind of helps you succeed and learn more over time. The last thing I wanted to mention was clean code. If you're writing a project, and again, it's just something you're trying to bang out, get to a client, and that's going to be it, sometimes moving fast is okay. I find that's rare because generally people do want modifications to it, and it becomes harder to keep up with over time. But this is on here as clean code. There's also a book called Clean Code that I highly, highly recommend. But it talks about when to use comments, or a thought on comments, I guess, because that's a very debated subject. Don't repeat yourself, all of these types of things. Naming things is hard. I see a lot of people try to make very shorthand method names, for instance. But you're often reading your code when you're trying to figure something out. You're reading it a lot more than you're actually writing the code. So if you have, maybe it is a very long name where it's like, this is the method that calculates the blank. If you can't decide on the method name that's like, 20 characters long, being more verbose sometimes and just having exactly what it does, when you're reading it, it kind of just makes sense instead of you trying to figure out what did this do again, right? So this book is great. I think there's lots of things in there. I'm not going to get into comments. I was going to, but again, very debated. But I think this book explains it very well. It's a shorter book, but I think it gave me a lot of perspective on a lot of different things. So I highly recommend that. Very quickly, some useful tools. We have Ditto. Again, this is just a very, put it out there list, but clipboard manager to, if you copy and paste a lot and you forgot, you copied something since the last time you had, you wanted something 2 or 3 copies back, Ditto kind of helps you out with that. This is a big one. If you're writing C#, LinkPad's a must. It lets you write very small programs without spinning up a whole solution or a project. You can quickly just say new file, type some C#, click go, gives you a result, dumps it out to kind of the console. Also connects to databases. So if you're doing data management, you can use C#. It also has SQL built in. So you can kind of, you can quickly just write small queries and test things out using this tool. So it's a great tool. Whimsical is another one. Lets you do those low fidelity wireframes or mockups or mind maps. Actually, the mind map you saw at the beginning of this presentation was done in Whimsical. Highly recommend this. It's very easy to use for kind of mapping out processes and flows. Hangfire is another one. If you were at 411 the other day, the team that was working with me implemented Hangfire. It's not so much the tool that's really useful. It's also thinking about what it's doing. It's scheduling jobs that happen once daily or every hour, or even if you're trying to do if you're doing things for a user that's submitting a file or something like that, and you don't need those results to be shown right away, instead of processing everything on demand, you can kind of offload that to a background thread and run that asynchronously using this tool. So great tool, very easy to use. Highly recommend it. Serolog and Log4Net, more of a logging frameworks that are very easy to use, give you great outputs. Again, somebody's already created this. There's no need to create your own logging system. Postman, I think a lot of you are probably familiar with. Insomnia. Another big thing is we're an Azure shop, so I'm sure AWS is the same thing, but there's just lots and lots of tools within these cloud platforms. Logic Apps is one of the ones I've been using recently. Function Apps, they have event hubs, storage, different types of storage. There's lots built into here, again, that if you're working for a company that has budgets to use, instead of you going to develop all of these things from scratch, these systems already have like all of these tools built in to where you can move data around, subscribe to different, when a file is created, go do this thing. Kind of if this then that was the tool, which I'm not sure, I haven't used it in quite a while, but it's kind of like an if this then that system. So lots of stuff there. I mentioned Note Time and Moment.js. Moving right along, I realized, and I thought this would happen, it's already 50 minutes in, so we try to speed it up a little bit. Don't forget infrastructure. So learning DevOps, I think, is really important. I think, there's lots of developers out there. One thing that's really hard to find is someone that knows how DevOps works, how those builds happen, and how, you're deploying to these different machines or websites. So I think that's a very useful skill, even if you're not going all the way to the server level and figuring all of that out, AD and everything. Even if you can learn kind of intermediary piece where it's doing builds to deploy to systems, I think that's a very crucial piece to learn as well. One note kind of on logging. I was kind of very against logging everything all the time in custom applications we were building before. I would just kind of log specific things that I needed. And then I think I was convinced by Justin one day, hey, let's put this log in here that logs every request that kind of comes in. It logs what comes in, what goes out. And then kind of the next week, I believe, something went wrong in one of the applications we're building. And instead of us going and diving down this whole, rabbit hole trying to figure it out, it was a very obscure thing. We looked at the logs that just had everything logged. And that was super useful. We could just find it right away, knew what the error was, and could go fix it, right? So I'm truly a believer in this now. Data is really cheap. And storing that data, one thing to kind of think about is, yeah, it may cost something for us to store this data, but it's also probably a lot cheaper than us actually trying to figure out the problem manually, right? If you're going to take 3 hours to figure it out, we're talking about, $300+ already. So it's probably cheaper than to just actually log everything. Analytics is important. There's tons of tools out there that do this. Google Analytics, Mixpanel, Sentry.io is another one that kind of more notifies you of errors. So lots of tools out there that kind of fit around your application that you've built that gives you insight into those. And just when you're in doubt, try to capture all the data you can. So if you're writing something for MVP and you're getting data back and you don't know if you're going to need it or store it or whatever, try to store it somewhere. Because if you have all of this data for the MVP application you're building, what you have the flexibility to do now is perform a migration or put out a second version and use all that previous data you captured and kind of, migrate that to be part of your application now. So just a quick note there. A few non-technical points, because I believe these are really important too. Being technical and all these tips I kind of just told you are more for development. There's some quick tips I wanted to say on the non-technical side as well that I've just figured out over time. This is a big topic, so I'm going to try to not go deep into it. But try to find, wherever you end up working, try to be part of a learning organization. And what that means kind of in short is I've seen some organizations that kind of, they have the mentality of, oh, I'm a senior person, I know everything. You're an intern or a junior developer, you don't. So, just go do your thing. Don't ask me. Like, that's my information. That's why I'm important. I'm going to do that, right? Those organizations, those sometimes that turns into, oh, you're stupid, or hey, you're not worthy of this, or whatever. Or I'm not telling you because I want my job security too, right? And that just creates a very toxic culture where everybody's kind of fending for themselves, and you're not having great learning going on. So I think you can Google learning organization, but essentially it's this whole mindset of we're just going to share as much knowledge as we can. No question's stupid. If you have a question, ask it. You know, there's no judgment. I think just having that psychological safety of having all of these people that feel like we can just talk about everything, have dev meetings, you know, and you're not going to be judged for it. That lets everybody get better. And if someone figures something out, let's also tell everyone about it, so now everyone can grow together too, right? Great culture. That's what we strive for here at Elevator 3 and Paystar. And I think it's really important, and I think everyone really loves being a part of it. So make sure that, I guess the bigger point was, make sure you find an organization that believes in that and isn't just, you know, you're not just a number. You're not just, hey, go do this and leave me alone. So I said that kind of already, but ask questions. Make sure you're always asking. You also kind of learn a lot by teaching too. You may think you know something, but when you start trying to teach it, or when you try to relay that information to someone, you kind of realize what gaps you have when they start asking questions to you, right? So that's a great thing. I have, like I said, I've been doing this for 11 years. Justin's been doing it forever. There's a lot of people I know that have a lot of experience now. Everyone has imposter syndrome all the time. If you don't know what that is, it's just feeling like you're not worthy, or like you should know more than you actually do. There's just so much information out there, and everyone's got something they're really good at or better at, right? It's just a spectrum. So everyone feels like this at some point or another. So just make sure you know that and kind of take that into consideration when you're trying to learn and asking questions and getting better. Senior anything in my mind, senior developer, senior designer, whatever, just means you've Googled a lot more than that other person, right? Senior whatever in my mind means you've encountered enough errors in your life that you know exactly what that error means now. Make sure you push yourself. That's gonna, you're gonna succeed in the long run if you just keep pushing yourself, keep always learning, reading, that kind of stuff. Finding a mentor is another really important point. Make sure you have someone that's always, giving you new, fresh information, giving you their experience. Try to latch on to someone, have someone to ask those questions, right? Kind of another point is watching what you say. And I guess this is just in a workplace, information spreads. I'll kind of just leave it at that. But whatever you say, just assume that everyone else is going to know it at some point. So just make sure you're aware of that. This one was actually something that I didn't do well at all, which was listening. I could listen, but what would happen is, and this is kind of in a consulting context, someone gave me this feedback one time, and it really, I've just kind of latched onto it, since 5 or 6 years ago. When someone's kind of telling you their problem, don't just jump in and try to, give them solutions right away. Let them kind of get all of their information out. Let them try to explain what's going on. And then what you can do is take what you heard and repeat it back to them and say, okay, so I'm hearing that you have this, and this problem and that problem. So this is what I think we can kind of do, going forward. Try not to interrupt people because they probably have something they want to get out that's really important that'll kind of change what you're thinking already. There's no need to kind of just jump in and cut them off. So that's very important, I believe. And then ask for feedback, right? I think this kind of goes along with the learning organization a little bit. But just having this culture where everybody's kind of providing candid feedback to each other, again, it just lets everybody get better, right? Everyone's just always learning about, what they can improve on, and nobody's really judged for it. So great stuff. Build relationships. Networking is important. Obviously in business runs on relationships. So try to build them. Try not to burn bridges. If you're going to leave an organization and go somewhere else, there's no need to burn that bridge, right? I kind of believe the same thing with interns or people, anyone who works here really at Elevator 3. I don't want to burn any bridges. If you come and say, hey, I hope you already came to me and said, hey, I have a problem, or here's what's going on, or what could be better, right? But if you don't, and you decide you want a job somewhere else, that's great. I'm happy for you. Like, you obviously want to go do this other thing. Let's keep in touch. Maybe it can be a mutually beneficial relationship going forward, right? So relationships are super important. I don't believe there's ever a reason to really burn a bridge. And then speak publicly. I know this is kind of, I have a lot of stuff here. I probably could have filtered it down a little bit, but speaking publicly gives you that ability to to build those relationships more, to go out and build confidence and give back. So go back to Southeastern when you graduate, be a part of that and try to help everyone grow because, Baton Rouge, Hammond, New Orleans, it's a very small area. You kind of see the same names pop up all the time. So just, again, building those relationships, giving back, it kind of helps everybody because now we all have a bigger pool that we can pull from and get better and grow this whole area, right? And then I kind of just had these books listed, kind of I already mentioned, Clean Code. There's one called Clean Coder, Clean Agile, Clean Architecture. These are my favorite books by Robert Martin. So definitely check those out. They're kind of light reading, but give you great overviews of development and kind of how to be a better professional, agile workflows and how you should architect things. 5 Dysfunctions of a Team is a great book that kind of talks about learning organizations in a roundabout way, but these are great fundamentals to build a team around. Radical Candor is all about, giving candid feedback. There's a YouTube video that kind of has a summary of this. It's great. And then How to Win Friends and Influence People is just a great networking book. So I think that's about it. I'm going to stop talking now. I'm at the hour mark. I hope that was useful and you got something out of that. I am going to try to host these slides at the link that's on this slide right here. I have not yet, but it should be up, tonight or tomorrow. So if anybody has any questions, please let me know. I know it was a lot.
Thank you, Brandon. So we want to open it up for questions. If anyone has questions, we have a couple minutes for that.
Well, great. I have my email on here. If anybody has anything or Twitter handle right here, if you have anything, please definitely email me. I'm always open to having a conversation or just providing some insight. Again, my colleague or partner Justin's on here. His is just Justin in Elevator 3. He's all in the weeds too, so I think we're both happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brandon. We appreciate you taking time out to come and speak to us. Again, this is recorded, so I know that we will put this in our library and be able to use it in the future. And we just appreciate you. So again, Thank you so much for coming.
Absolutely. You guys take care.
Take care. Have a good one.
Bye.